41 games down, 41 to go in this regular season for the Sacramento Kings as of recording this episode. And normally at the midway point of the season, I make a video where I kind of recap what was going on, talk about how each player is doing individually, and usually at the start of that video, I talk about kind of the team overall pretty quickly and kind of lump the coach into that discussion. But this season, the coaching topic is a little different than past seasons. It's a little more interesting. So I figured this time make a separate video, make it into its own thing, because I think right now it's a great time to kind of reflect on the Mike Brown firing and what Doug Christie has brought as he's come in. And then in a separate episode, I'll talk about how players are doing individually. Right now, we are exactly 10 games into the Doug Christie era of the Sacramento Kings, and they're 8-2 in that period. Now, that's way too early to provide any definite statement about whether firing Mike Brown was the right move, whether Doug Christie is the guy to lead this team in the future. It's absolutely way too early. 10 games, that's nothing for something like this. So that's just something to keep in mind as we talk about the coaching situation and what has changed. Just remember, we're 10 games in. That's pretty early. And a lot of times there's a honeymoon period for a team under a new coach. And I think the Kings are in a honeymoon period. It's just like, how much is the drop off once you kind of exit that honeymoon period? Sometimes it's not very much, and other times it's a lot. And I don't think it will be a lot for the Kings, and I hope it won't be a lot. But it's just something to keep in mind that we are only 10 games in. So before kind of reflecting on the Mike Brown firing, I figure for the people that didn't hear my thoughts on the Mike Brown firing at the time, I'll give a little bit of a recap or a little bit of a reminder to those who did hear my thoughts about the Mike Brown firing. And so for me, at the time when Mike Brown was fired, I really didn't like the Mike Brown firing. And the main reason being, it felt like the team was kind of putting off for even more time than they already had been, filling the holes on this roster. Now, with DeMar DeRozan, they did fill a certain hole, but there was the very obvious hole at the wing position, at the center position, backup center position, just the size and defensive depth that this team lacked. And it felt like they were just kind of putting that off again and again and again and trying to blame it on something else and someone else. And also throwing away the stability that the team had built, which is not normal for the Sacramento Kings to have. Stability that De'Aaron Fox in the offseason talked about how much he loved this stability, how much he loved having one coach for an extended period of time, and a stability that may have played a factor in being able to recruit a talent like DeMar DeRozan. And so now 10 games in, we're a little separated from that firing. So not only have I had more time to think about it, but also we've seen the team turn around and play well. And so I still think that Mike Brown was a little hard done because he wasn't given a balanced roster. He overachieved the past 2 seasons with the team and obviously brought the team to pretty successful places that the team hadn't been in a very long time. And then at the first sign of it going downhill, he gets fired. But of course, I can admit that this team absolutely underachieved. Despite the balance issues, this team absolutely underachieved. And at the time of his firing, I believe they were 13-18. Obviously, this roster should have been better than 13-18. And he wasn't making the correct moves to be able to try to fix the situation. He made tons of mistakes, and I admitted that at the time, that of reacting to the Mike Brown firing. And so at the time, I recognized that something had to be done because it was just such a dark time. That was absolute rock bottom for this team. And so really, I understand something had to be done. And the only thing that really could be done was firing the coach. Like, of course, I wish they could have made a trade. And really, I wish they had made a trade in the offseason or a move in the offseason to be able to balance the roster out better. Because then, if you come into the season and still underachieve, then you do the same thing you did this season and you let go of Mike Brown, and that's totally fine. And I think in that scenario, there just would have been less what ifs from me. I guess it's like, okay, you gave him the roster, then he underachieved. I guess the only downside to kind of doing that was, well, we saw that Mike Brown wasn't able to utilize this roster well. And we saw that Mike Brown eventually pretty much did lose the locker room. And so what if you gave him a balanced roster, and because of that balanced roster, then you achieve great things? And so that means you're not going to fire Mike Brown, which could then hold you back from actually achieving your ceiling. So maybe it was actually a good thing that it happened this way. That's just another way of looking at it. But I do think what I got wrong about the Mike Brown firing was that it was clear that Mike Brown was not utilizing the roster that was given to him correctly. But the other part of that is that it felt like he had lost the locker room. Because I think you can break up this Kings season, into 3 parts. The first part of the season is the first 26 games where they went 13-13. Then the next part is just a little 5-game stint where you're 13-13, you've won 4 of your last 5, should have been 5 out of 5, should have won that Memphis game. Anyways, you come into a 5-game homestand where you're feeling good, won 4 out of 5. This is where, you kind of take off this season. And you lose 5 straight games, including that just horrendous Pistons game to cap it all off where you foul a 3-point shooter. And so that was hitting rock bottom, was losing 5 straight games on a 5-game homestand to go 5 games under 500. And then the third part of the season is the post-Mike Brown era, the Doug Christie era. But I think the reason I wanted to separate it out like this was because that first part of the season, the first 26 games, the team was playing fine. They weren't great. They weren't overachieving, but they were fine. They were top 10 offense, middle of the pack defense, and really they just lost a bunch of close games. A ton of clutch games. And so really what I put that down to was you're trying to integrate DeMar DeRozan, and that's not an easy thing to do. And so even in losses, in a lot of the losses, I think you could see a ton of positive things. I thought you could see progress as the season went on. And so through those 26 games, it looked like Mike Brown was doing just fine and that we were integrating the team well, even though, yes, if he would have utilized the roster even better, obviously playing Keon Ellis, it would have made the defense better. You would have been shooting better from 3 because that's adding a 40% 3-point shooter to the team. So you could have been better than 13-13, but 13-13 was still okay. But then it was that 5-game homestand where there were never any positives you could take out of any loss. It wasn't just, oh, we're losing close games in the end. It was like, there doesn't feel like there's any effort. There doesn't feel like there's any hope. Like, it was just probably the worst 5-game stretch I've ever felt as a Kings fan, because we've never had expectations like this and then also fail so miserably. And so something had to be done. And now I can obviously accept that a coaching change had to be made. And I understand that that's what the front office had to do. Wish it didn't have to be like that, but that's just how it had to be. And even in the moment, like I knew Mike Brown was probably going to get fired. I liked Mike Brown a lot. I think I liked Mike Brown too much and hated the roster imbalance too much to like fully see that it was the right move, even though that I saw it coming. And I think Monte McNair, he saw this team be 13-18, but I think probably what pissed him off even more was seeing Mike Brown underutilize a guy like Keon Ellis and misuse the roster that he created, because he probably just has this great vision while putting together this roster of exactly how things are going to go together. And he's admitted the weaknesses of this roster, but I imagine as just the mastermind of the front office, the GM, you're just like seeing how all the pieces are going to come together. And, it's one thing for it to just not work. It's another thing to see the head coach not utilize players in the way that you want them utilized. So I'm sure he was like, I got you this great undrafted player that I just sniped out of nowhere, right? And you get Keon Ellis and he plays so well. And, when Keon Ellis plays well, Monte McNair is looking like a genius. And so he's probably just pissed. He's like, we're 13-18 and you're not using Keon Ellis. I had always been a very big supporter of this front office, I think, compared to a lot of people, at least on social media, who didn't like Monte McNair and, Monte McMiss on the margins or whatever, up to the firing. And then I absolutely overreacted and was definitely too harsh on Monte McNair and Vivek Ranadive. That being said, my point still stands that this team has to make a move because it's not Monte McNair. He constructed a great core and he just hasn't built around that well enough up to this point. The bench is just very bad right now. And so my point absolutely still stands that this team needs a move at the deadline. But I also criticized Vivek Ranadive, and that was probably my biggest overreaction, probably just from the PTSD of all the past coaches that had been fired that were good coaches, and now we have a coach of the year that we're firing. But obviously, Michael Malone and Dave Yeager, and then bringing in Luke Walton, and all the times that Vivek has just meddled in the past, of course, the Nick Stauskas moment and all of these things that happened in the past. I can't remember when I said it, but maybe in this off season or the past off season, I talked about how I thought Vivek really improved as an owner and did take his hands off the wheel as much and was just doing cool things like making the beam and marketing more so. And so I do think that's true, and I definitely criticized him too much at the time because I do think it was Monte McNair's decision, like the Kings said. And also I was like mad, like we're not in the luxury tax, we're not going in the luxury tax. And, even I know that was stupid because what team like the Kings goes into the luxury tax? Only if you're a big market or got money like Steve Ballmer are you going into the luxury tax, even if you're not a championship contender. And, that's not defending a billionaire for not spending. That's just the reality of the situation. So overall, in terms of my reaction, what I got wrong, I definitely overreacted in terms of my criticism of the front office and Vivek Ranadive because something had to be done, and that was pretty much the only thing they could do at that point. And of course, I still stand by many of my criticisms of what the front office has done in the past to lead up to this point, not building a balanced roster. But I think it's very reasonable to give them until the deadline to make something happen here. But now we can move on to the next portion of the season, the Doug Christie era. And that's the happy part of the season so far. Like I said, only 10 games, way too early to really know what we got. But the team being successful looks a lot more like how the team was successful in the past couple of seasons. Doug Christie has done an amazing job so far. And I want him to succeed so badly because I think the number one thing that he's brought to this team, not just for the players and for the actual organization, but it's to the fans. He's brought the vibes to the Sacramento Kings when the vibes were severely lacking. Him bringing the team up to the beam and talking about how much the team meant to the city and all of the things he says in press conferences that make you want to run through a wall for him. But not only does he just say that, I think as a former player, especially as a former Kings player that many fans already loved, it's like he was a guy who would put everything on the line for this exact same team. So fans love him even more for that. But the players see a coach saying that and know that it isn't just talk. It's like he walked the walk. And that's why I loved how somebody asked Keon about, like, are you a better defender than Doug or whatever? And Keon's like, yeah, I'm a better defender. But he hadn't, like, watched Doug Christie play. And then you have DeMar, not totally for that reason, but DeMar asked the film team to put together film of Doug Christie and his playing time so that the team could see what their coach did and how what he was asking them to do is also what he did in the NBA. And so I thought that was really cool that DeMar did that. And so just things like motivation. I mean, I feel like motivation is just half of coaching, and he's gotten a 10 out of 10 for that portion of coaching. And he's also done things like get the team to stop complaining to the refs so much and focus on the game. And that's something early in the season that I had expressed concerns about how this team reacted to when calls weren't going their way. And so he has seemingly just fixed that. But from a more tactical standpoint, the other half of the coaching job outside of the motivational half, he hasn't come in and made like sweeping changes. Right? It's not like he's completely revamped the offense, revamped the defense. This is still the same Kings team of last year, of 2 years ago. This is, if you showed me this game back when we were in December, November, I would have been like, yeah, this is the Kings under Mike Brown. It's not like night and day difference from a tactical standpoint. But it didn't need to be, because like I talked about, in those first 26 games, the team was right there. They were so close to having a much better record if they could just figure a few things out. And those 5 games in the middle of the season that got Mike Brown fired, like, that's not this Kings team at all. That's just, I guess, Mike Brown losing the locker room. So only minor tweaks were needed once the coaching change was made. Offensively, the main thing that he's been saying that he wants to do in press conferences, to the public, is just get out of our 4 guys' way. Get out of De'Aaron's way. Get out of DeMar's way, Domas's way, Monk's way. And let them be great offensive players. Now, it's not as simple as that, just like, yeah, you guys go play. But the one just banger quote that he said is, he'd rather teach someone how to play than run a play. Like, that's a banger quote. I mean, it's like, teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime, give a man a fish. Whatever that quote is, it's like that. Under Mike Brown wanted a free-flowing offensive system with constant movement. He wanted to get up 3-point shots. I mean, he talked about Sabonis taking more threes. He wanted a super fast team. He wanted a team that was going to get on the offensive glass. Like, these are all things that he wanted, but he just wasn't really successful in getting that out of this team this season. And so it's not like Doug has come in with a whole new philosophy, like, oh, we need to shoot threes. It's like, we need to play fast. Like, Mike Brown knew that, but it's about actually executing to do that. And so I think under Mike Brown, it's like he wanted this free-flowing, consistent movement offense, but he had principles that, while he wanted, yes, this free-flowing, it was still a bit rigid, and it would go from set to set, and it would, waste a lot of shot clock without decisive movement. And so I think Doug has just freed guys up to make more of their own decisions, and you don't have to waste the first 10 seconds or more of the shot clock going from set to set. And, if Fox sees something, then he can go for that. Not that they couldn't before, because, if Fox saw something before, of course he could go for it. Like, that's not really it. But I think he just has them less focused on running an exact play, and he has just given them more freedom offensively. So I think Doug has just been more successful in getting what he wants the team to do in terms of shoot more threes, play faster, offensive rebound. I think he's done that by, one, just being more motivational. And some people may think that's like a cop-out answer, but I really don't think it is. And that's only part of it. I do think the players see Doug Christie and they see him as a former player, and they are inspired to play for him. And I think from Mike Brown's standpoint, I think guys honestly just like outgrew him. This team, like, Mike Brown's not a bad coach. He's obviously not a perfect coach, but he's not a bad coach. You don't win coach of the year if you're a bad coach. But I think this team just outgrew him. He has those kind of like military standards and all these principles, and I think the team just outgrew him, and I don't think that's the first time that that's happened to Mike Brown. And so I think especially in like the first year, that works really well, especially from an organization that really needed that. But then the team kind of outgrew him. And so now you have a team under Doug Christie that isn't as afraid to take risks, maybe, isn't as afraid to take certain shots, because under Mike Brown, maybe they get benched for it, or take certain risks defensively because maybe they get benched for it, which is kind of ironic because Mike Brown's whole thing is like, shoot the ball, and you might get benched if you don't shoot the ball. But it's like allowing guys more freedom, allowing guys to play stress-free, I guess. And then on the defensive side of the floor, I think the main improvement is pretty obvious, and it's just you play Keon Ellis more. Because if you look at any lineup that has Keon Ellis in it, that just improves the defense so much. And that's why I honestly think he should still start. But it's pretty simple. More minutes for Keon equals better defense. But another thing we've seen is, like I said, we've just seen guys play harder, and it's just especially easy to see the difference between when it feels like Mike Brown kind of lost the locker room in that 5-game losing streak, and it was a 6-game losing streak, but 5 games under Mike Brown. there was just this massive drop off. So not necessarily from the first 26 games, but guys were absolutely playing harder. And I think the one guy that I can really point to and be like, this guy just played harder defensively and was more locked in is Malik Monk. Because Monk, the first part of the season was fine. Like, he was okay defensively. He was what we know, I feel like he is defensively. And then in those dark days, it was very kind of clear like he was a problem defensively. And it was hard to watch him. It was hard to watch DeRozan. Those two guys play defense. And I also think when the rest of the team isn't up to their standards defensively, then it really exposes a guy like Malik Monk. But I just think Monk was pretty awful defensively for those games there. And the second that Mike Brown was fired, it completely flipped and Monk turned into like this massive positive defender. And he has been. Now, maybe massive positive defender is going a little far, but he's been so much better. He's been so much more locked in defensively. He's been a defensive playmaker, getting steals, and he's always good for a crazy block every now and then. But just his closeouts have been better. His rotations have been better. It just feels like he's more locked in. And so on one part, I think it's being locked in, being more bought in. And then on the other side, I also think there's something else to it that, Doug has said on both sides of the ball, he wants to simplify things. So from a defensive standpoint, without being in the locker room, I don't know exactly what that means. But by simplifying things, maybe guys just kind of know what they're supposed to do more, and it's easier for them to know what they're supposed to do. And so sometimes it can look like a guy isn't giving effort, but maybe that's just because that guy didn't know what he was supposed to be doing. And so maybe Doug Christie has come in and simplified things, and that makes it look like guys are playing harder because they're in the right spots more, because they're ready to do their job. And I think a guy like Malik Monk, it's especially obvious when he's kind of out of position or a little slow to a spot just because of his size. And, he's asked to guard up slightly. He's a small guard in a small backcourt. And so maybe the difference in defense is a little bit of both, a little bit of effort and locked in, and a little bit of that simplification, just making it easier for guys to be in the right spots. Because effort is an interesting thing. In basketball, you see a guy always be in the right spots, and a lot of times you say that's effort. And so it's like effort, it requires a guy to be going hard at all times, but it also requires a guy to be smart. I think of a guy like Josh Hart. He's such a good rebounder. Yes, he just goes. And physically, he's fast. He has a lot of stamina. He can jump. But he's also just a smart player. He knows where to be. Don't just dive on the ground for the sake of diving on the ground for, to be like, I showed effort. Like, no, you dive on the ground if you have an actual good chance of getting the ball. Because if you dive on the ground and you don't, you're putting your team at a disadvantage. So it's like effort, but it's also being smart as well. And so it's definitely possible that Doug has come in, simplified things on the defensive end. Guys know where they're supposed to be more, and that's why it looks like guys are more locked in. But again, that's all kind of speculation, and because we don't know what they're doing in the locker room. But what we have seen from the defense is I think Doug has just mixed up coverages a lot more. We haven't seen a whole lot of new stuff defensively. It's just he's mixing it up a lot more during a game, during a single game, showing a lot more, different looks and constantly switching things up. We have seen a few different zone looks that we hadn't really seen before, and we're seeing a little bit more of that, and we've had some success in that. So that's something that Doug's done well, or maybe it's Luke Laux coming with those ideas. I don't know, but the main thing defensively is Keon Ellis. One more time, we're 10 games into this, and I'm super happy right now, and things are going super well, and I'm super happy for Doug because I know he's wanted to be a coach, and he's coaching the heck out of this team right now, and it's fun to watch. Hopefully this keeps up. I by saying it's only 10 games, I'm not trying to take away from anyone's excitement because I am, still very happy watching this team right now. But also when I'm evaluating it, I'm not going to be like, Doug Christie solved all of our problems. We're going to the finals. I got to stay a little more down to earth than that. But I'm always much happier for positive overreactions than negative overreactions. So usually I sit on the side of being more of a positive overreactor, but I definitely overreacted negatively more to the Mike Brown firing. And I have no problem admitting that, and I hope that I was wrong, and so far it seems like I was wrong. So anyways, that is it for this episode of the Roll Report. Very soon, I will be coming out with a video talking about individual player performances at the halfway point. I had those stats to watch for each player at the beginning of the season, and so I'll be incorporating those into this coming video. And also, if you guys have been watching for a while, I've had a ton of people commenting like, yo, I've been watching forever, didn't realize I wasn't subscribed. So if that is you and you aren't subscribed, please consider subscribing, because pushing for 1,000 subscribers, which is pretty crazy to say, definitely never thought I would even come close to 1,000 subscribers. And now it's just like, seems inevitable, which is really cool. So thank you guys for that. And I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.